Gonna see if this works. Alright, is this thing working? Oh man. Is my audio bad? I mean, is my... Don't tell me the video's lagging again. Okay, I think it's working. Maybe. Looks better. Looks better. Okay. In my pre-test, I was getting some really laggy video. I had to restart the system and make things work, but it looks like it's actually... Alright, let's see. How do I... Oh. Alright, well, let's see. I need to... How in the world? Okay, so I've never done this before, and I'm trying to add a moderator. Because last time we got some weird stuff going on. Some of you may remember that if you're here. If you were here last time. Let's see. That's not it. I don't know how. I can't find... Oops. Not sure what's going on. Well, anyway, here we are post-Thanksgiving, and it's been interesting. There's several things I am thankful for that I would like to lead off with, one of which is not having to think about the Rings of Power, which might change in the course of this live stream. This is the last time I'm going to take any questions on the Rings of Power, but I would just like to point out that I am very happy not thinking about that show, and it has made it so much clearer to me that I do not want to watch more of it. The more I have not thought about it, the happier I've been. I'm also really thankful, I should say, for what I think is one of the best YouTube communities out there. I really love the fact that most of you come up with really good, interesting comments on my videos and stuff, and it's a small community. I don't have that many subscribers, but I really do like the engagement. Obviously, there's still comments that are, not the most informative or interesting, but you can't expect every comment to be awesome, but I appreciate even the ones that are just there for the algorithm. So, really thankful for everybody who supports, and especially the ones who financially support through Patreon, YouTube memberships, and now Utreon as well. It's not something I ever expected to happen. I started this channel as purely just like a side hobby, so I would have some way to talk about Tolkien, because I don't have that many people in my real life that I can be that geeky about things all the time, because it just goes over their head. So those are the things that I am kind of thankful for right now. And I'm also thankful that Black Friday is behind us, because that was just not fun. Wasn't even trying to do that much Black Friday shopping, but unfortunately our grocery shopping had to be done on Friday, and it's just not good. So yeah, that's kind of my Thanksgiving and Black Friday thoughts. I'm not seeing anybody in the chat yet, so I'm still waiting for questions to come in, unless my chat is just not working properly for some reason. Can somebody at least put something in the chat so I can make sure the chat is working? And until that time, I will just kind of ramble on, I suppose. I guess one thing I could mention is things that I have upcoming in videos is going to be, I've got a video on the Zimmerman script, which, you can't actually see the Zimmerman script. There's no public way to view it. I think a copy of it with Tolkien's markups may be at Marquette University or one of those universities that has a lot of Tolkien's writings and stuff. Well, then why don't I see chats? Okay, I'm having problems then. Oh, there it is. Where's my... There we go. Okay, for some reason the chat was hidden. Now it's here. Okay, cool. Good, I have not missed any super chats at least. But anyway, the Zimmerman script, I've got a video coming out on that this coming Monday, and let me tell you, it's a mess. Those of you who have read Tolkien's letters probably know a good bit about that already. So, it's wild. You can find some additional information out there besides Tolkien's letters, but it's everything you learn about it is just bad. So yeah, looking through the chat here, let's see what we got. Let's see, not a whole lot in the way of questions yet. That's fine. Yes, I see people have noticed the moderator, and as the name makes kind of obvious, it's my wife. My wife is moderating, so you know it's serious. Let's see. Yeah. Anarian Elendili. Same here. I love my wife to bits, and she is a geek, but she is not into Middle Earth. I am in precisely the same situation. My wife is more of a Star Wars person, and that's perfectly fine. I just can't talk Lord of the Rings with her that much, so... Favorite villain in the Legendarium? Ooh. So... Oh, dang, that's, for everybody who didn't notice, that's the Brothers Kryn, asked that question. That's a really interesting question. And it's interesting because so many villains go through so many different iterations and phases, and who evolves into who and how they evolve and all that. Like, if you just take, let's say what we might call the canon of The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and the Silmarillion, I would probably pick somebody like Saruman, for the simple reason that we get more of a direct, interface with him, whereas we really don't get much interface with Sauron, and certainly not a whole lot with Morgoth, especially in the Lord of the Rings. But if you start reading into History of Middle-earth and all of the Unfinished Tales and all the other stuff, Morgoth becomes a lot more interesting, and so does Sauron. And if I had to pick one based on all the information we have available, I think I would probably end up picking Sauron at that point, because his character does get a lot more developed. Tolkien comes up with a lot of thoughts about Morgoth in terms of his motivations, the kind of path he's going down, and that kind of thing. But Sauron, we get a lot more of his interactions with different peoples. The only real direct interactions we get with Morgoth are when he's pleading for mercy with the Valar, or when he's mocking Hurin when Hurin is stuck and he can't do anything. So it's like, yeah, I mean, there's not that much there for Morgoth in terms of character. Sauron becomes much more of a developed character as you read most of the history and all the other stuff. So probably Sauron, although there are some really interesting kind of minor villains. The Witch King is one that I find really interesting, because for a while he's kind of acting independently in a sense when he's the Witch King of Angmar, and that's one of those things where it's like you'd like to know more about, but you don't. And that's one of the things that I love about Tolkien, is the fact that there's always more stuff that you can ask questions about and not necessarily get an answer. So there are villains like that who are kind of on the outskirts, where it's like, that's really interesting and I'd like to know more about that story, and because that's one of the things I like about Tolkien, those are also really cool. So, that's kind of a slightly different thing, but yeah. Let's see. Do you accept physical fan mail? I'm not giving out my address, sorry. And I don't have a P.O. box, and I'm not about to set one up. I appreciate, Nimbus Angelo, that you want to send me a Christmas present, but I'm not going to give out my address. Favorite Tolkien game? Council of the Rings. Are we talking physical board game, or are we talking video game? Gotta be Morgoth, says Detailer. Well, close. Favorite aspects of the Peter Jackson films? The attention to detail. I mean, the detail of the story in terms of the adaptation of Tolkien's story, no. But the attention to detail in terms of the things they put in the movie, great. I mean, everything they did with those movies was just so well done. And the music was great, the costumes were great, everything was great. You felt like you were in that world, and you felt like it was a real world. And that, in one sense, is one of the things that makes Tolkien so great, is because it feels like a real world that you're reading about, not something that's just kind of artificially created for the purposes of one fantasy story. Because he was creating like an entire world from, the 19 teens on. Let's see. The mysterious of Morgoth is what lures me in. Yeah, well, there is that. Do I play any Xbox games? No, never owned an Xbox. I've been a Nintendo guy ever since I was a youngster. So I've played an Xbox a few times and a PlayStation a few times, but I've never owned either. Always Nintendo. Let's see. Thoughts? Council of the Rings. Thoughts on the 3 Lord of the Ring fan films? I have a review on Hunt for Gollum and Born of Hope and Horn of Gondor, I believe. All 3 of those I think I've done fan reviews of on my channel, Council of the Rings. So if you want to find my thoughts on those, go for it. Also, Council of the Rings down here says both really, referring back to my inquiry about whether he meant board game or digital game. I'm going to be honest here. I have not played a whole lot of video games in the Tolkien realm. And many of them were not that good. Like, I've played the old Super Nintendo Lord of the Rings that was based on Bakshi's film, and it's fun for a game, but my goodness, it is not anything like an adaptation of the story. It's weird. The best game I think I would say in terms of video games would be the Return of the King, the hack and slash thing. I also played the Third Age on the GameCube, which is fun, but it's not any kind of a groundbreaking RPG or anything. It's just fun, and it has Tolkien in it, so, but the Return of the King I could go back and play again and again just because, the mindless button-mashing hack and slash is kind of fun to do every now and then. Board games, The War of the Ring. Hands down, no contest. The War of the Ring, which is a giant, epic, sprawling, massive thing that I can't get anybody to play with me for the most part, is an amazing game because it is a really good adaptation of the story in part, but it's also just got really interesting mechanics. It's just really, really cool. You missed out on something then. Let's see. Do you think there is noticeable difference between Tolkien's writing from earlier in his life compared to later? Themes, writing, levels of fantasy, parts seem very different from others. I don't know what that name is supposed to mean, but it's a random string of letters as far as I can tell. So, yes, there is a very clear difference. And if you read, like, The Lost Tales, he's going into tremendous amounts of detail to describe, like, the banners, the panoply. Like, whenever you get to the fall of Gondolin, he's describing everybody's crest and what they're wearing and all this stuff. And it reads very much like what you would expect a medieval text to describe if it was kind of describing what was going on in either a real life situation or a story about the past. Whereas his later stuff gets less and less focused on that kind of thing. And the Silmarillion in particular, because of the way he was rewriting it over and over again, becomes a lot more broad overview type and less focused down to the narrow specifics. The Lord of the Rings still focuses on a lot of details, but it tends to be a lot more about nature and that kind of thing. Thematically, I'm not sure they change that much, except in terms of developing into a more mature and a more, real high level type of a thematic type of story, because he perfects it over time. The biggest difference, though, that I always noticed is just the kind of detail he was putting into those really early stories that falls out really heavily later on. Let's see, where was I? The Witch King is, the new... Istari says, I wish we knew more about the Balrogs, particularly Gothmog. Gothmog being the chief of the Balrogs in the First Age, who gets, if I remember correctly, he's the one that gets killed by Icthelion. Yeah, I mean, I think the Balrogs are supposed to be kind of not known to a large extent. I mean, they're spirits of fire who serve Morgoth, and kind of what more do you need to know, in a sense? But I get what you're saying. Whoa, my chat just skipped a few lines. Do you also enjoy the lore of C.S. Lewis, George R.R. Martin, etc.? Asks Reuven Goldstein. C.S. Lewis I enjoy. I don't enjoy him on the same level as Tolkien. I used to read Narnia, a few times when I was younger, and then I need to go back and read it again because it's been a long time. I've read it, parts of it on and off with my kids, with my wife sharing the duty of that, so I've never read through the whole thing in a long time. But I do enjoy Lewis, and I enjoy his space trilogy a lot too. Perelandra is slow going, but man, the moral lessons and the stuff in there, it's really heavy with that stuff, and each part of that trilogy hits in a different way, and it's really interesting. I also really like Lewis's nonfiction, frankly. Some of his other fiction is good too. I need to read Till We Have Faces. I got that for my wife a few years back for Christmas because she wanted it, and she read it and enjoyed it. I need to read it because I've heard it's one of his best. Martin, I have not read anything by him, and I have no interest in reading anything by him, and I have no interest in watching Game of Thrones. I just have no... It's like, I want my fantasy to be a little bit cleaner than that. Let's see. Anarion Elendili. So the length of the ages. Do you ever feel that Tolkien stretched things out too much? For example, it takes about 100 years for Sauron to attack Gondor after Akalabeth. Well, I kind of wonder if Sauron waiting that long is partially because he had to reconstitute himself, and that took some time. But also there's the fact that, his armies were in disarray. They had been without a leader for a good while. He had to reamass, his power and concentrate things. I do think, and I don't remember if I mentioned this in a video somewhere. I want to say I might have. But I made a comment in some context at one point about how one of the most unrealistic, I might have said this on Twitter, one of the most unrealistic things about Tolkien is how long the Númenórean civilization lasts without becoming completely corrupt and collapsing in on itself. Because, as we all know from our own history, men don't do that well. Now, granted, Númenóreans had a much longer lifespan, so it would probably take longer in some ways, but there is definitely a lot of stuff like that. Like, Gondor lasts more than all of the Third Age. It begins in the late Second Age, and then it lasts into the Fourth Age somehow. Like, civilizations just don't last that long. So, in a sense, is it stretched out a little bit too much? In that sense, yes, I think it is. Is it stretched out too much in terms of, does it ruin the narrative? I don't think so. I think the narrative works. I think it's just a matter of, can you really square that with the way human nature works out? The Brothers Crin, smash that like button, folks. Let's get it up to 20 since there are about 30 folks here. Appreciate it. Let's see. Shadow of Mordor is the only good one. I'll have to take your word for it, Detailer. Anarion Elendili. And years for Gil-galad and Elendil to march to help Anarion, and Third Age has hundreds of years between some events. Yes, the Third Age does, and that, yeah, there's definitely a lot of time that passes in a lot of those things. Brothers Crin would like to see a Turin Turambar or Tuor game. Man, Turin Turambar. The problem with that is, if you play that game, you want to have a good ending when you win, not a bad ending when you commit suicide. Tuor, Pape says, Tuor of the Edain, why was he allowed in Valinor? We don't know that he was. That's just, like, it's said. It's one of those, it is said things, and we just don't know what actually happened there, unfortunately. Oh man, okay, we got a super chat, and it's my sister-in-law is trying to throw me hard balls. Thanks a lot. Uh, um, she asks, are there redeemable parts of Rings of Power? Yes. The short answer is most of Elrond and Durin's relationship and their interactions with each other was at least enjoyable. There were still issues with it, but outside of that, so much of the story is either not well done, or the characters are just not likable, or, well, I will say this: the scene where Sauron slash Halbrand finally outs himself to Galadriel, and basically just reveals who he is. That scene was well done. It was really well done. I thought. I mean, I was watching it like, ooh, this is good. At least in the cinematic and all that. But the only problem with it was the way it was done and the way it conflicts with things we kind of wanted to see. The really big fans who knew the real backstory and what was supposed to happen. It's like, this is not how it should have worked. So, I mean, the scene was done really well. It just didn't fit with what most people, I think, wanted, who already had preconceived ideas of what they wanted. So let me skip back up here. Which Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings film is your favorite? Asks Noah Rolfe. Fellowship. Not even. The Return of the King has better moments, but it also has bigger problems. And on balance, that means the Fellowship wins out. But if I had to pick my favorite moment, it's a Return of the King moment. So, Council of the Rings. Not sure if you can respond to that, but any World War I connection to Tolkien's work fascinates me. Well, I think a lot of people have commented on the fact that the Dead Marshes is probably pretty clearly an example of something that he's drawing from his own experience, like seeing just dead men in the muck, and that the horror of that. I don't know enough about his experiences in World War I to go further than that. I haven't read, for example, John Garth's book, which is an autobiography of his time in World War I and all that. Not autobiography, I can't believe I said that. Biography of Tolkien in World War I and his experiences, so I don't really have that much info on that to speak to it, but there are certainly things like that. D. Taylor, unfinished tales should be reserved for George R.R. Martin from now on. Let's see. The Brothers Kryn. 4 friends set out for war at Council of the Rings. Just kidding. There's a mound of corpses built by Morgoth for one thing. Well, yeah, there's that too. Council of the Rings. Meneldil. Hero or villain? He seemed happy enough about Isildur's demise and took the throne of Gondor. I mean, I don't know that I would characterize it that way exactly. Meneldil was the son of Anarion, who ended up being king, and Isildur established him as king before he went off and got killed. I mean, Isildur, I think, was going to be the High King over both, but Meneldil was still going to be king in Gondor, so I don't know that I would characterize it quite that way. I mean, there might be something that gets said in, like, a History of Middle-earth that goes into a little more detail on that I'm forgetting, but based on my memory, that's not... Nimbus Angelo, are you excited about the War of the Rohirrim anime coming out in 2024? I am certainly interested. The cool thing is it's got Miranda Otto doing some of the narration, and so that's kind of a really cool connection back to the Peter Jackson films. And some of the things that I've heard about it are kind of promising. Now, I mean, it can always get screwed up, but I have more hope for that than I had for Rings of Power. But it's still early, and a lot can happen between now and then, so cautiously optimistic is probably where I would put myself. D. Taylor, do you think Rings of Power can salvage a watchable Season 2? Yes, I think they can make Season 2 watchable. Can they fix the whole project at this point? No, because Season 1 already did so much to undermine logic and the narrative that Tolkien actually wrote that they can't fix most of that. What they can fix is the mistakes they already made. Jake Ralston, what was the motivation for you to bring not only the lore to everyone, but your own flavor / understanding of all that is Lord of the Rings and Tolkien? Okay, So y'all could probably tell that he's related to the other person who left a super chat if you want to look. But, you know. I kind of mentioned this at the early stage of the live stream, but I just am so enthralled by Tolkien's world and not really having anybody else to talk with about Tolkien for the most part. I just had to have an outlet, and so I started making videos, and the longer I make videos and the more topics I've already covered, the more I have to dig deep, and the deeper you dig, the digger you deep, that would have been funny. The deeper you dig, the more interesting stuff you find about Tolkien, and it's just, you can't avoid getting sucked in at some point. I mean, if you're into it, you get drawn in hopelessly, and there's just no getting out. Ultimately, there's just so much to Tolkien, and it's not just the fact that he created a big world. It's there's so much to learn from it. He has such an interesting perception of human nature, and not even just human nature, but like he actually thought about what would it be like if a race of elves was immortal, and what would that do to their psychology versus what it would do to a human, and just the stuff that was put into that. It's just, there's always really cool stuff to learn, and just having conversations with people too. Like one of my favorite conversations that I've had was with David Rowe. Go check out that video. It is criminally underwatched, but it's about Tolkien and wisdom. I forget the exact name of it, but it'll actually be linked in my video that's coming out on Monday. So if you can't find it, wait for Monday's drop, and then you'll see that link in the description. And the conversation we had led to just this amazing insight that I had never had before. So I mean, like, talking to people and getting interaction with people is just, you learn more and more and more, and it's always fascinating. Let's see. Epic Kingdom. I'm already a fan of Lord of the Rings. I don't have time for Game of Thrones. That's kind of my thought too. It's like Lord of the Rings takes up too much time as it is. I don't have time for another fantasy. Let's see. Okay, so CCK, etc. says, you have pointed out Eru having seemingly a subtle involvement in the Lord of the Rings, but Eru also has a very clear one during the sinking of Numenor. Why do you think Tolkien chose portraying both? Well, I think in Lord of the Rings he really, really wanted to focus on not being overtly religious, and part of that was because the whole thing is supposed to be pre-modern or prehistoric even, and so there wouldn't have been any of the known established religions, and he didn't want to beat people over the head with religion, but it's still based on a very monotheistic thing, and so he has this backstory, and you have to come up with an explanation for why Numenor is no longer there and how it happens. And for Tolkien, that basically ends up being, God sunk the island. I mean, the island has to sink because it was always an Atlantis myth. So you've got to do something to make it sink, and you could do it with natural disaster of some kind, which of course would be like Plato's explanation, or you can do it the way Tolkien did, which is like, okay, it's kind of like a mirror to the Tower of Babel. Men are getting too powerful and too corrupt, and eventually they overstep too much, and they have to just get wiped out and start over. And that's kind of what that whole thing is. And so it's kind of an interesting tie-in with his own, theology, but it's also a step back from that in some sense. But he wanted his main stories to be a little less overt about it. And, like the history of Numenor, in all of his published works, never really gets into most of that stuff. He ends up, getting into the Silmarillion has a section on it, of course, but that Christopher Tolkien put in there, but it's not clear whether Tolkien himself intended to be quite that explicit with published stories. So he probably would have if it came to it, but it's just interesting to see how also Eru Ilúvatar steps back more and more, and the Valar step back more and more as time goes on. But that was one of those things where it's like the Valar were like, okay, things are out of hand, we have to do something, but we don't feel like it's our place to make the kind of action that's going to be required here, so we're just going to let Ilúvatar handle it, and he does. Let's see. Reuven Goldstein says, Roman civilization lasted over 2,000 years, a good comparison to Gondorian longevity. Yeah, but it went through a lot of changes. It's not really the same thing. Gondor lasted as the same civilization for 3,000 plus years, and Rome didn't really last that long. Roman civilization changed so radically that, I mean, by the time you get to the Byzantine Empire, I don't think it's really the same. And it's related, obviously, but I'm not sure you could really say that's a good... It's the closest comparison I think we have in history, but I don't think it really quite gets you there. Let's see. Fathel, I don't know how to pronounce that, Fathel. The Rings of Power really missed out on the political dynamics between the King's Men and the Faithful. Yeah, I mean, they kind of tried to go there, but it's kind of annoying how they just had it like on the periphery. It's just edged out a little bit, and you can't really get a good feel for what exactly is going on there and the reasons behind it. It's just kind of there in the background and brought into the forefront a couple times, but it's just not... I don't think they did that very well. I agree with you. Let's see. CCK, etc. says, I have to be honest, Adar was pretty good as far as villains go. It didn't save the season, but I truly enjoyed his scenes. Yeah, I think he was one of the better aspects of it. We didn't get a whole lot of him. His discussion with Galadriel was interesting because it brought in a lot of concepts that Tolkien was working on later in his life, and so that was really cool. But unfortunately, there just wasn't enough of him and enough of the same kind of stuff that we got from him for the rest of the series, or the season, I should say. Nicholas McMullen, what are your thoughts on the Tolkien movie? If you're referring to the, 2019 biopic, I have a review of that too. If you're thinking of a different one, let me know what you're talking about. Let's see. Council of the Rings. Arvedui said Isildur never relinquished his royalty in Gondor and only had Meneldur rule Gondor, like Isildur and Anarion rather, did under Elendil, so Isildur was still High King and thus ruler of Gondor. Correct. But Meneldur isn't the one who rejected the kingship of, the elder line at the end of the day, so... Let's see... Mr. Dwarf Bangity Bang. His family be roasting him via super chats. Yes. You could say that. They're also showing me some love and support because, they're family. And I appreciate it. Let's see. Council of the Ring says, so in a way he usurped the throne of Gondor so Valandil never became the next High King. I don't know that that's clear, though. So, the whole idea behind all that was that Isildur was going to be High King, and Meneldur was going to rule Gondor kind of under the High Kingship of Isildur, who was going to be in the north, Arnor. But it's not made clear that Meneldur rejected Valandil as the High King. For all we know, that was accepted for hundreds of years until you had the kinstrife in Gondor. I just don't remember there being anything that would really show that Gondor rejected it before that point. Epic Kingdom. Could we see your Lord of the Rings collection sometime? I have been meaning to do that. I just haven't got around to it. I will try to get that done sometime in the near future. There's just been so many other things. Council of the Rings. If Tolkien could expand an element, I assume that's supposed to be an element, from the lore and turn it into a story or book, what would you like that book to be about? That's another thing that I actually kind of have a plan about in the near future. I'm going to do a video on Tal Elmar. And for those of you who know what that is, you know that that's really interesting. And I think that would be one thing that I would like to see, because it's one of the very few stories we get about men in Middle-earth in the Second Age, and from the perspective not of Numenorians, but from, people who live in Middle-earth. And that, I think, is one of the least explored aspects of his legendarium, in a sense. Now, you could also look into, like, say, the Blue Wizards, and what did they do, and how successful were they, or even explore, further east, or go to Harad and see, like, what's going on down there. And those are the kind of things we were hoping, a lot of us were hoping, would come out of the Rings of Power, would be that we would get some of this kind of stuff explored. Because if you're going to do fan fiction, you might as well go explore things that Tolkien didn't even get a chance to look at. Oh, if he had had more time, maybe he would have, because ultimately he just he ultimately expanded on everything over time, and so he might have done that even. But that would be one thing that I would have liked to have seen, was more exploration of those areas that we don't really know that much about. Because there's always that lingering question, like, how far east does it go? Where was, the Lake of Cuvienen? Could you get back there? And, I mean, you can't. We're told that you can't. But, point being, there's so many ideas that you could explore that we just don't get to, because we're kind of contained to, like, the northwest of Middle-earth, and we don't know really a whole lot beyond that, and it'd be really cool to get a more exploration. But Tal Elmar was one of those places where it's like, he went and started to talk about something that he hadn't really spent a whole lot of time on. And it would have been really interesting to see if he had managed to write that whole story, what that would have looked like. Let's see. Anarian Elendili. Well, Faramir did point out that Gondorians had changed too, and the start of Gondor was as basically a few city-states and then swelling into an empire and then long decline. Yes, but, like, at the start, Gondor is under a king, and apart from there being, like, a feud over who ruled it at one point, it's still the same monarchy all the way down. I mean, Denethor, at the end of the day, is still, a steward of the kings who all ultimately go back to Meneldil and Anarion. So I'm just, that's still a much better connection than you could get with, say, the Byzantine Empire and Rome. What happened to the Blue Wizards? Asked Detailer. Wouldn't we all like to know? Let's see. Council of the Rings. Which inaccurate fan theory do you hate the most? The one about Gollum killing Frodo's parents bothers me the most. I mean, I don't know that bothers me so much, for the simple reason that it's so absurd, I can't give it the time of day. Like, Gollum killed Frodo's parents. Frodo's parents didn't die till after Bilbo had his adventure, and we know Gollum went east. He could not have found the Shire. If he had found the Shire, he would have hung around there and looked for the ring. It's just so absurd. There's no... it is just... That one's just stupid. Now, fan theories that I find the most annoying... I don't know. I mean... I think one of the ones that I find the most annoying is, and a lot of people are going to understand this, is the ones where Gandalf is falling into the abyss of Khazad-dûm and he says, "Fly, you fools!" And they're like, "Oh, he's telling them to fly with the eagles." It's like, any kind of a fan theory that takes something that Tolkien said and tries to twist it into something that we would mean in modern English because they just don't understand the concept of slightly archaic language. Like, we don't say that in our modern... We don't say fly, we say run. Okay, fine, but, like, we're clearly not talking in totally modern English here. And when people say that kind of thing, I mean, the whole, "Why didn't they take the eagles? Gandalf told them to take the eagles." No, he really didn't. And that's... I don't know how many people mean that seriously, but anybody who does mean that seriously, just stop. Stop now. I've got a new member, Terry Down. Thank you. Appreciate that. Phoenix Rising gives a $4.99 super chat. What is the one Tolkien memorabilia or gift you wish you could have? Ooh, that's a good question. that's actually a hard one. There was a long time where I wanted the Noble Collection Lord of the Rings chess set, which had expansions for the Two Towers and Return of the King. I'm not sure I really want that anymore because it's A, really gaudy, and B, I have kids and they would destroy it. um, Golly. I mean, the thing is, you might have noticed I'm a sword guy. I like swords, but I have already. I can't think of a sword that I really would just really love to add to my collection because these are some of the best ones that have been made. I'm trying to think if there's one that I can think of that would actually be really nice. I guess the three Elven rings would be really cool. I mean, not the Rings of Power versions because they're not horrible, but the uncut stones just look so corny and cheap. It's like, why would you do that? But the Peter Jackson versions, those are beautiful. Although I quibble with Ninya's design in Peter Jackson. I don't particularly like the little star shaped thing on it. I'm not a huge fan of that, but the Elven rings would be pretty cool to have. Those are of the things that I don't already have. Let's see. Elrond never claimed King of the Noldor after Gil-galad because he was half elven. Okay, you're responding to somebody's. Ted McElwee says, no matter how goth you are and how hard you try, you can never become more goth. Yeah, I've seen jokes like that going around lately. One of them had to do with Sauron. Rosa Scrobola. I've been wondering about the possible interpretations that Tolkien had for the Two Towers. What is the conflict between Isengard and Cirith Ungol? Why is the conflict between Isengard and Cirith Ungol one of the options? It's not so much a conflict. There's two ideas about the Two Towers. Which Two Towers is he talking about? One of them is the Isengard, or Orthanc is really the tower, and Cirith Ungol. And the reason for those being the towers is it's the two towers that are the main emphases of the story. So, the story in the Two Towers focuses primarily on Rohan and Isengard in their conflict. So you've got the Tower of Orthanc, and then you've got Frodo and Sam making their way through Minas Morgul and the Tower of Cirith Ungol. Not through Minas Morgul, literally, but, right next to it. So that's the reason why that particular option is one of them. And Tolkien himself, if I remember correctly, actually kind of went back and changed his mind or forgot which Two Towers he was talking about. But, I'm not even 100% sure I remember which Two Towers he was referring to. It might have been Isengard and Barad-dûr, or it might have been Isengard and Minas Morgul. I forget. But the reason why Isengard and Cirith Ungol is one of the options is because that's really where the story kind of ends and is centered around for a lot of that, the book. Let's see. CCK, Tolkien refers to stars a lot. Did he in any letter or interview explain his fascination with stars and what they mean to him? I don't think so. Although I suspect part of it relates back to the Crist poem, which is where he got the name Eärendil originally, except it's not Eärendil in Crist, it's Eärendil, I think. I may be forgetting. But it's the whole thing there is that name is associated with the morning star in the poem. It's an Old English poem, and it set off a lot of his ideas about Middle Earth. So probably some of his fascination comes from that. The fact that one of the biggest names in his entire legendarium is associated with the morning star. Let's see. I wish there was a Silmarillion chess set. That would be cool. The Brothers Kryn. That would be cool. Council of the Rings. Is there anything you fear will happen in Season 2 of The Rings of Power? I assume you won't watch it, but what's the worst case scenario if it can get any worse at this point? Oh, it can get worse. I mean, I guess my question is, with 4 seasons left, and they've already forged the 3 Elven Rings, what do they have left to do? One of the things that people have been speculating about is that Celebrimbor is going to let Halbrand back as Halbrand, because he just likes him and he's just going to disregard Galadriel. To me, that would be just stupid. Really stupid. I don't know that would be worst case scenario, but it's a horrible idea, in my opinion, which means I'll probably go with it. There are worse things that could happen, I suppose, but I mean, at this point, I'm just so over it. I think so little about it, and I don't want to think about it that much. I don't want to think about the worst case scenario because it's already bad. I mean, I suppose worst case scenario is they literally just start contradicting every point of lore that Tolkien wrote about the Second Age in anything he ever wrote, and just trashes it, and what'll be really disappointing as an example will be if what's his name, Pharazôn just claims the kingship because the people decide that they want to kick out Tar Miriel and get rid of her, and then he doesn't even end up marrying her. It's like that whole story of him basically taking her as a wife by force and claiming the kingship on his own just because he was so popular and just nobody was going to stop him. That is pivotal to his character. That's who he is. He's a proud, arrogant guy who can get what he wants because he just can. And if it just becomes like a popular uprising and they just get rid of Miriel because she's perceived as weak or something else, and then they just install him by popular vote or something, that's just going to be so lame. That's an example of like really, really bad ideas. But I mean, I don't even have the imagination to come up with a worst case scenario. I'm not even going to. I just don't. I can't even do it. Let's see. In the Silmarillion chess set, when Numenor loses, you have to throw it in the pool. Ted McKelvey, that's a good one. Let's see. Istari asks... Wait, oh my gosh, my thing skipped again. Where'd it go? When Sauron first used the One Ring, do you think all the elves wearing the other rings of power detected him, or just the ones wearing the 3 that Celebrimbor made without Sauron's aid? Well, so the thing is, we don't know that anybody was using the 3 rings. Celebrimbor presumably might have been wearing one of them, but he hadn't given the others to Galadriel and Gil-galad at that point. So I suspect there were other elves wearing other rings, and that's who detected Sauron's presence. That's my theory on that. A Palantiri prop would be interesting to have. Well, Jedi Knight, it's interesting you say that. One of the things that my brother has is a piece from the Noble Collection which looks like a Palantir, but it's got like the one ring around it, and then Gandalf and Saruman kind of flying around it like they were in the like they're doing the Wizard's Duel thing that they have in Isengard in the Peter Jackson movie. It's a really nice piece, but that's the only Palantir replica I can think of. Oh, my wife. My wife loves corny jokes. The Morgoth joke is one your wife would have told you if she found it first. Yes, I know you would have, dear. Thank you. Mr. Dwarf Bangity Bang, if I say the word Grond, anyone from the Reddit forums? I don't want to know what that means. Don't inform me. Anarion Elendili, a footnote in the disaster of the Gladden Fields. He, Meneldil, was in fact well pleased by the departure of Isildur and his sons, and hoped that affairs in the north would keep them long occupied. Okay, well there you go. You have actually found something that I forgot about. So yeah, I guess he was. I'm still not sure I would call him a villain. I mean, probably just didn't want his uncle looking over his shoulder or something, but I don't necessarily think I would think of him as a villain exactly just because of that, but it does certainly lean more in that direction, so good job finding that. Council of the Rings, do you have any theory on how Narsil ended up in the hands of Elendil? I actually have done a video on that topic. It's been a while, and I don't remember the name of it, but I'm pretty sure I'm almost 100% positive I did a video on that exact topic somewhere, so that video is somewhere in my back catalog. So go check that out. I'm not even sure I could remember my exact theory off the top of my head anyway, which is why I'm not directly answering that question. Nimbus Angelo, what do you think of Peter Jackson's version of Orcrist? Bleh. I hate it. And the reason I hate it, there's two reasons I hate it. First of all, a curved blade should not be this giant half-moon thing that he made. That's just, if you're going to make a curved blade, make something like a scimitar or a katana or something. I mean, the amount of metal in that blade is just too much. Second, it's ugly. And actually, third, because I'm a purist, elves use straight blades or leaf-shaped blades. They do not use curved blades. That is, with one exception that you can find in the Lost Tales, as far as I know. A curved blade is always associated with orcs, because they're called the crooked scimitars of the orcs. And the whole idea there is like the white hat, black hat thing in westerns. Straight good, crooked bad. Like, it's really elemental and simple, but it still represents something, and I think that's important. And the fact that he gives the elves all these curvy blades, aesthetically they're pleasing, except for Orcrist, because Orcrist just looks ugly. But, I mean, why would you do that when you have Glamdring? Look at Glamdring, that is beautiful. That's gorgeous. Why would you go and make an ugly pair for it with that stupid Orcrist design? It's terrible. Sorry, I get mad about the little things. Let's see here. Council of the Rings. Yeah, that's what I thought about him referring with a happy enough. Yeah, okay. Brothers Kryn, gotta go. See you all around. Sorry, you have to go. I think he's also streaming around this time, so sorry you couldn't stick around. But thanks for showing. Ash473. Oop, and it skipped again. Hang on. In one of your recent videos, you were discussing the importance of Tom Bombadil, the why Lord of the Rings has aged. Yeah, I was. I just read The Two Towers, and Sam said he wished Tom would help them in Shelob's lair, but Tom isn't there. Now Sam has to deal with the problem by himself, showing the reader he has grown. Good point. That's one of those little minor references that you don't necessarily remember all that well, but that's a very good point. So that's a really cool instance of, and I was thinking about that this morning as well, because the piece, this is the one I did on the CBR, I think CBR.com, where they were talking about 10 ways that the Lord of the Rings has aged poorly, which is just dumb. But it was like, there's all these characters that don't impact the plot. They just show up and they're gone. It's like, what do you mean he doesn't impact the plot? He saves the hobbits twice. The fact that he then leaves the story doesn't mean he didn't impact the plot. Like, and I didn't even think to mention that because it's so dang obvious. But it's like, if you just didn't impact the plot, he literally saved the main characters from death twice. Ugh. Sorry if I'm busting anybody's eardrums, but you get me started on these topics. And have you read the Anglo-Saxon poem The Wanderer, and what's your thoughts on it? It's very interesting considering the period it's written in, Council of the Rings. If it's in one of the volumes that's about Tolkien stuff, then I have. If it's not, then I haven't. And I know I've read bits and pieces of it that are quoted in some of the Tolkien books, like History of Middle-earth and whatever. I don't think I've ever read the whole thing. And, that's one of those, if I was younger and had more time, I'd probably delve into that kind of stuff, because that's like the next step, right? You become a Tolkien fan, then you become a Tolkien geek, and then you become an absolute, aficionado about Tolkien, and then you become a medievalist, right? That's kind of the progression. Let's see. Detailer, the fly you fools burns me up when people talk about the Eagles flying Frodo to Mordor plot hole, but do you think the Eagles could have made it more than 5 minutes once crossing into Mordor? I mean, Sauron's guarding that. There's no way it would have been just that easy. Would they made it more than 5 minutes? Maybe, but they're not going to succeed that way. Council of the Rings, I'm wondering who from the broad beams and fire beards that got 2 of the 7 rings. Like, why? Wouldn't they simply be petty lords of small mines in Eredlune? That's an interesting point, too. Like, do we know that the 7 rings went to the 7 different families of orcs? I mean, not orc, dwarves. Do we know that? I can't remember if there's a specific reference. Let's see. CCK. Glorfindel was brought back for his deeds in life, but to me it doesn't seem like his deeds was that far greater than a lot of others. Did the Valar know he had a bigger role to play in the future? Well, Glorfindel sacrificed himself to save a bunch of people. And there are a lot of heroes among the elves, but not many of them die in that exact way. Finrod did, but Finrod probably wanted to stay in Valinor after all the mess he went through. Terry Down. I've been trying to post here. Why can't I do so? Well, you have now. Okay, looks like he did it again. Okay. What do you think of Turin and Nellas? Is she the brown girl he refers to at the very end of his story? Would Turin's fate have been different if he had responded to Nellas? That's a really interesting point, too, because Nellas is one of those... I think she's a later development of the story, and she's a really interesting one, because it helps to bring the contrast of who he could have been and was, and who he ended up being, into very sharp focus. Nellas is... I don't even remember if she's even mentioned in the Silmarillion. I think you might have to read like the Unfinished Tales and the Children of Húrin standalone book to even get her. But no, I don't think he's talking about her when he's talking about a brown girl. He is very intentionally hoping that Moblung is going to confirm that yes, Nienor is dark-haired and kind of brown-skinned, and therefore not Niniel. That's what he's doing there. He's not actually describing anybody that he knows. He is hoping, because he at that point I think he has a sinking feeling that yes, I have actually, in fact, married my sister unknowingly. And he's hoping to goodness that Moblung is going to say, yeah, how'd you know? And when, of course, he doesn't and says, no, she's light hair, she's like really light-skinned and blonde. What are you talking about? And then he's just like, I did it. I married my sister. Now, I don't think anything ever could have happened between Turin and Nellas. I think he could have learned a lot from Nellas and he would have been better off because of it. But I don't think... Can you go ask Mommy about that? Toddler interruptions, sorry. So, anyway, what I was saying was, Nellas is one of those characters who, I don't think she ever could have been like his wife or anything, but I think the fact that for a long period of time he spent a lot of time with her and then just came to forget her as he got more involved in war, and then to the point where he will later tell Beleg, who are you talking about? And Beleg's like, have you completely forgotten? And he's like, yeah, I don't remember that part of my life. Like, he has so lost who he is. That's kind of her significance in the story. It's like, she was kind of his last connection to anything good and wholesome. And if his mom and sister had made it to Doriath before he left, and even before, hopefully, he stopped hanging out with Nellas, he would have been a much healthier person psychologically, I think. But it's just, Was Tolkien influenced by Lord Dunsany? iPlat asks. I don't know enough about Dunsany and his work to know. I know he was familiar with Dunsany. I am almost certain of that. But that's... I can't really comment beyond that. Tales of the Rings. Do you think the dwarves would call their maker by the elven name Aule, like in the series? No, I don't. They would call him Mahar. Or Mahal, rather. But, like, only the most dedicated geeks are going to know who that is, because that's such a small reference, even in the Silmarillion, that I think you have to... Plus, the other thing about that is, You could actually, let me steel man the Rings of Power here for just a second. I know that's like not my normal thing, but you could make the argument that if that is their name for Aule, maybe that's a name they don't want to say out loud amongst other people very much. Now, ultimately, we would only know that if they did say it out loud to other people like elves. And maybe Mahal is in fact an elvish name that they came up with. But if you really wanted to give the Rings of Power the most benefit of the doubt, you could say that somebody at some point picked up enough Dwarvish to figure out Mahal. And therefore the elves know about it and they could put it in the Silmarillion. But it's actually a Dwarvish name, and therefore they just don't use it around other people if they don't, have a reason to. Because they like to keep that mostly private to themselves. Let's see. I am coming up on an hour, so I don't want to go too much longer. I will try to catch up to the end here. Ash473, have the movies and the series influenced the way you imagine characters in the books? Yes, and that is both nice and not nice at the same time. I think Ian McKellen did such a great job as Gandalf that I'll never not think of Gandalf that way, and that's fine. Gandalf the Grey. I don't particularly like his Gandalf the White. But I don't think that's his fault so much as the writing and directing team. But anyway, I really like that. Now, what I don't like is Aragorn. Because Aragorn doesn't look like that. So, I mean, it's kind of a plus and kind of a negative. Richard Coffin, assuming Saruman succeeded in making his own ring, investing his power into it to amplify his own abilities, which powers do you think were enhanced for him while he wore it? I don't think it's said. I mean, the only thing he has left at the end is his voice, so I would tend to think it would have to be that. I mean, I don't know what else it would be. And it's kind of like his main gig, really. Ash473, it was one reason that held me back watching Rings of Power because Peter Jackson has corrupted my imagined world. Yeah, and, that's for sure. I mean, there's definitely, some of the imagination, too, is wrong because Ian McKellen is too tall to be Gandalf. Gandalf's supposed to be 5'6". CCK, what minor character from the Legendarium would you want to know more about? What minor character? Gonbori Khan would be an interesting choice. Him and his whole group. How long have they been there? What do they do? How do they survive in between these two civilizations? That's really fascinating. Beyond that, there's all kinds of minor characters you could talk about. Do you count Bombadil as a minor character? Goldberry. Goldberry is a minor character relative to Tom Bombadil even, and I would love to know more about Goldberry. What does it mean that she's the River Woman's daughter? Who is she really? There's just all kinds of stuff. Let's see. Council of the Rings. Do you think Nienor was cursed with the love Finduilas had for Turin? The text when she goes near the mound sort of gave me that feeling last time I read The Children of Húrin. I've never gotten that impression, but that is an interesting concept. I think it probably works the other way around, though. I think Turin is really picking up the Finduilas vibes because he finds Nienor there, and she looks similar enough because Finduilas was also blonde, that he makes that connection. He almost thinks that it is Finduilas' ghost or something, and so I think that's kind of what plants the seed in his mind. So I don't necessarily, unless that's what you mean by cursed with, the love Finduilas had for Turin. I mean, if that's what you meant by that, then sure. Let's see. Council of the Rings. In regards to the 7 houses of the dwarves being given rings, it's what Gandalf says in the Shadow of the Past chapter. It's just funny to think about. 2 rings in Ered Luin, why and where. Okay. Yeah, I couldn't remember if it was that specific, but okay. Terry Down. What are your thoughts on Thringwithil? Does she die in the full spiritual sense, or does Luthien just take her outer skin/shape? Well, that's a tricky question because it's not 100% clear what Thringwithil is. I think that she is some kind of a Maya, and therefore I don't think she completely died. I think she just lost her physical form and Luthien took it. Now, if she's not a Maya, that makes it slightly more complicated, because then it's like, okay, what is the ring with exactly? Um, let's see. Council of the Rings again. You are busy with questions, my friend. keep them coming, though. I don't mind. Why do you think Saruman didn't take Gandalf's ring when he was held captive? It was the Ring of Fire, so wouldn't it have been interesting to him in some way? You know, that's one of those things. I know Corey Olsen has speculated on this in his stuff on Lord of the Rings. There's the possibility that he just can't see it. Because as Galadriel will tell Frodo, you know, her ring cannot be hidden from him because he has worn the ring and seen the eye. Or something to that effect. I can't remember exactly how she phrases it. So, it could just be that Saruman, just by virtue of being one of the Astari, does not have the capacity to see the ring. It could just be that it's more well hidden than he can reveal, and therefore he may not know that he has it. Although we are told, I think in the Unfinished Tales material, that he suspects, and that's part of the reason why he envied Gandalf. So, you know, there's some interesting ideas going there, but the overall impression I think that I get is that probably he just didn't know. I can't imagine that he would just let Gandalf keep it. You know, I just that I don't think makes any sense. So I think he probably just didn't know. If he did let him keep it, it could only be because he thought he had no use for it, which might be because he knew from his own ring lore what it did, and therefore he was like, who needs a ring that helps you inspire other people, you know? Little does he know, right? And therefore he's just not interested, and he doesn't see that Gandalf having it could be any threat, which of course it is, because partially by Gandalf doing what he does with the ring, he ends up bringing about the end of Sauron himself, so it obviously is a threat. So, yeah, from the ring bearer and one who has seen the... yeah, I was close. Thank you, Anarian. That's the exact line I was looking for. Jedi Knight, if you could put one cut character back into the Peter Jackson version, which would it be? Dang. I want to say Baragond. Part of me would love to see Tom Bombadil on screen, but I'm not sure I trust even Peter Jackson to get that right. So, I think Baragond, although, man, so many cut characters. Yeah, I think I would have to go with Baragond. There's plenty of characters out there that you could put back in that would... Farmer Maggot would be another good one, but I don't think it would work that well for the pacing of the movie for him to be in there in the role that he's in. It works perfectly fine in the book. I'm not sure it would work that well in the movie as done. Now, if you were to do a mini series where you could do like 2-hour episodes and have like 8 to 12 of them, yes, put Farmer Maggot in. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, Baragond would be my choice, because he's a minor character, but so much cool stuff happens with him. He saves Faramir. He gets rewarded and punished at the same time by the same action by Aragorn at the end, which is just such a beautiful scene and a beautiful illustration of what Tolkien is trying to tell us true kingship is. So I think that if they had just put him back in and given him his full role, that would have been awesome. Let's see. What the heck is the Arkenstone really? Asks D. Taylor. It's a really pretty stone with a name that means Silmaril, but is not a Silmaril. That's what it is. And it's not even a joke. Like, Arkenstone basically means the same thing as Silmaril, if I remember correctly. But it's one of those instances of Tolkien reusing concepts from stories he had already written, just in a different way. But that's another fan theory that I have issues with, is that the Arkenstone is the Silmaril that was thrown into the... No, it's not. It's not. The Arkenstone is not, because the Silmarils are going to remain where they are until the end of the world, and then they're going to be used to... Yeah, anyway. Keurin, is that Welsh? Do you think Gandalf's apparent affinity for fire is innate, like Aryan, or something to do with the ring? I certainly think the ring has something to do with it. Gandalf is a Maya of Lorien, if I remember correctly, which means fire is not something he would be naturally connected with. So I don't think it's innate. I think it's probably more connected with the ring. Council of the Rings gotta go. Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for all the questions. And that's the end of the chat, and it's like 9 minutes past the hour, so it looks like Anarian might be typing a question, and if he is, that's going to be the last one I take before I call it quits. Are you typing a question, Anarian? You know, not bad for a post-Black Friday stream when other people are being smart and not being on YouTube. This is just like the best time I can find to do it. Let's see. Not until the time came for him to depart was it known that he had long guarded the Red Ring of Fire. Yeah, it wasn't known. Yeah, certainly it wasn't known, but it was suspected. You know, with that, it raises an interesting question, too. Like, did Frodo never catch on? Did he never see the ring? Because theoretically it couldn't be hidden, but maybe he just never noticed. And it was only because Galadriel kind of called attention to hers. But, yeah. Anyway, yeah, Saruman's jealousy was because Galadriel wanted Gandalf to be head of the White Council. Yes, but I think there is also a reference to him suspecting that he had the ring. I want to say. I can't remember where it's at offhand, but I'm pretty sure it's somewhere. Anyway, okay, so that will wrap it up. I'll go ahead and end it here. Thanks, everybody, for showing up. Appreciate the super chats for those who gave them. Thank you, Terry Down, for becoming a member. And I will see you all on the next one, which I wanted to maybe try starting doing these monthly, but man, Thanksgiving and Christmas and all the busyness just makes it way too hard for this part of the year. So maybe next year I'll move to monthly. We'll see. But yeah, anyway, I will see you all on the next one. Namarie.